Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and it's Monday, which means, or it might be Monday. Actually, I don't know when you're looking at this, but it's Monday now for me. And that means the time for another political postbox where I look at some of the comments that have appeared on the videos from the last week. And we'll start off with the first one, which is another thing that we will be losing if we leave the EU, and particularly if we leave the EU under any sort of arrangements, which mean not following EU rules. So the comment here is the worst employers, of which there are increasing numbers in the UK, have long wanted to get rid of the EU Working Time Directive. This prevents workers from working without proper breaks for rest and sleep. The transport industry is desperate to get rid of it, even though it causes a level playing field in the UK and across Europe, and is enforced via the digital spy in the cab recording hours of travel in real time. When I drive, the last thing I want is some careless, greedy lorry driver doing a continuous double shift and falling asleep at the wheel while causing massive destruction. But no doubt the accountants have done the sums and these practices save more money than it loses through unwanted mishaps. This is about prioritising money and profits over saving life and health and safety. So there's a few things to unpick there. The interesting thing about the EU Working Time Directive, do you know something? When I was, the last protest I went to in Manchester, was it a couple of months ago, something like that? And interesting, and I wasn't allowed to discuss this. It's really maddening. When I'm with my girlfriend, I'm not allowed to talk politics because she knows the people. And this is a bus full of Labour supporters, Labour members. And one of them was using the EU Working Time Directive, would you believe it, a socialist, as evidence for why we should leave the EU, which is utter madness. And yet, and this is how convoluted some of the thinking goes, he was in favour of it, but he was using it as an example of why we should leave the EU. I'll just leave that one with you for a moment. Yeah, it did my head in as well. And it was maddening that I wasn't allowed to go over and just talk to him. But, so in terms of driving, yeah, I mean, I have to say already as it is, I always get a little concerned when I'm overtaking a lorry and I can sort of see it creeping across and think to myself, are they a bit tired? And I know the rules are supposed to sort of stop that, but at the same time, it's a bit like me. I mean, just because a driver's not driving for a certain amount of time doesn't mean they've been sleeping in the interim. It doesn't mean to say they're all fully awake as well. But when there's a couple of things you sort of pointed out here. Is when I drive, the last thing you want is some careless, greedy lorry driving. What I would argue in this case is it's not the lorry driver that's greedy, it's their boss, the person who's safely sat in an office back there telling them to get from here to here. It's why I always, you get a situation where a lorry just overtakes another lorry to go 1 mile an hour faster, and of course it's going to significantly slow you down. I'm always fine with that. I never have an issue with that, and I will always let them in, because I always think from my point of view, in terms of the journey times I have, which are not usually that long, like an hour at most usually, and, slowing down by 10 miles an hour for a couple of minutes is not actually adding on much more than seconds to my whole journey time. But on a very, very long journey for a lorry driver, that, extra little 1 or 2 miles an hour does make a difference over a significant period of time. And of course, many of them, they're not given very generous time slots to get from where they need to pick up the goods to where they need to drop them off, or vice versa. Sometimes it's to the minute. So they're really up against it. So I have an awful lot of sympathy for lorry drivers. But yeah, if you went from a situation where you could just drive and constantly drive till you're bleary-eyed and actually falling asleep at the wheel, that isn't helping the situation at all. And when you say here, you say you've no doubt the accountants have done the sums and these practices save more money than it loses through unwanted mishaps. I'm not sure they have. I'm not sure it does. I think there's a lot of misconceptions, particularly amongst bad business leaders, and we have, as you say, a lot of them in Britain, that think they just have this mindset of if you get a worker to do more work, more hours of work, they will be more productive, because they assume a set rate of productivity. But it's not the case. And progressive companies recognize this. They think, actually, we can get more productivity by getting you to work fewer hours, but more intense, and have more work, like lifetime balance. Recharge your batteries, spend more time with your families. And then those workers as well, if they've got better conditions at work, will naturally be more productive because they're they will appreciate the company they work for. Whereas if you just pile more and more work onto them, you're effectively employing drudges, drones, and they will just work at a low rate, the bare minimum they can get away with, because you're not inspiring them to work. Japan, which is a culture, very, very hard working, extremely strong work ethic. And, there's rolled out ideas there of they've reduced the number of days. They've basically introduced a 4-day working week. And bear in mind, 1 day working in Japan is a proper day's work as well, not like we have in the UK. And they've found that productivity has increased because it's not simply the case that productivity is a set rate and therefore you increase it by increasing the number of hours. It doesn't work like that. So to suggest that it will save them money and it'll be better business to allow these drivers to carry on driving until one of them crashes into something, I don't think they have done the sums on it. I don't think it is better. I think they just think it's better because they don't think, is my take on that one. But, certainly it is a timely reminder of this, of just what we will be losing outside of the EU. And the Working Time Directive is one of them. And the madness of lots of people who are going to be hit by the loss of this, having voted for it, is an insanity to me. Next one. I did a video just related to this, actually, didn't I? It says, Phil, you are assuming that nothing will change until the end of 2020, but we have an untrustworthy rule breaker in control. I don't think I am assuming anything, by the way. I think next year is going to be a proper roller coaster. And I am struggling at the moment to even try and predict what's going to happen 2 weeks hence, let alone a year. But of course, that at the moment, that the end of 2020 is the deadline we're aiming for. That's what we're looking at as ending the transition period. But I'll read the rest of it first. Because the withdrawal agreement is not set in stone, unlimited by law, morals or integrity. There must be many alternatives. Maybe he can cancel the agreement whenever he likes. Alternatively, if he ignores the agreement and starts free trade with the USA, wouldn't the EU have to cancel it themselves? So, picking it apart here. The withdrawal agreement is not set in stone. Depends what you mean by that. I suspect what you don't mean by that is that it can be changed. We know it can't be changed. I think what you mean by that is Boris Johnson isn't bound by it if he decides he doesn't want to be bound by it. Well, yeah, that is part of the problem. It's what I was sort of talking about this morning. Will Boris Johnson breach it? Because that could be messy. That would be really messy. Because if he breaches it, it doesn't mean the EU instantly says, right, you've breached it, it's cancelled, you're not in the transition period anymore, we're putting checks on the borders and all the rest of it. Because he might say, I haven't breached it. In fact, he will say, I haven't breached it. I'm fulfilling all the parts of it. You're just being difficult, and saying to his supporters, look, the EU are always difficult, aren't they? But I'm going to stand up to them. I'm going to stand up to them for you. So they'll have to go to court. Obviously, it'll be the EU court. And then he'll just say, well, it's the EU court. They're biased. I'm going to stand up to them and blah, 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 blah. And then blame them when it happens. So I can definitely see that as a possibility. At the moment, I will accept that he's probably going to go to the end of 2020, but I'm not assuming that that's definitely going to be the case. Then he says maybe he can cancel the agreement whenever he likes. And again, I think if he does that, it will be not overtly doing it, not explicitly doing it. It'll be a case of breaching it, but saying that he hasn't breached it. And then when the court, which will have to be an EU court, says otherwise, he'll say, well, that's the EU, they're biased. Then it says here, alternatively, if he ignores the agreement and starts free trade with the USA. Now, I really don't think that's going to happen. Even if we accept everything the USA wants from this trade deal, it still can't be done in a year. It's possible if we just let America write up the trade deal as it wants and then we just sign it. I say we, Boris Johnson, but he is we. None of this, I don't go in for any of this, not my prime minister stuff, this thing that started in America with not my president when Trump was elected. He is. Boris Johnson is my prime minister. And he is. He's my representative on the world stage. I don't like that, but he is. So I'm not going to go into any of that nonsense, not my prime minister. Yes, he is. I'm not going to go and find an island somewhere and set up my own country or go and emigrate to another country. That's the only way I can stop him being my prime minister. That is it. I am realistic on that. But Yeah, I can believe that he might be ready to go in 2021 immediately so that he can say he's got a trade deal really quickly. It'll be absolutely dreadful to us. But let's bear this in mind. Boris Johnson has managed to, everyone knows, lots of people, millions of people that voted for the Conservatives know that the country is knackered. And they also know that the Conservatives have been in power for the last 10 years. And a great many of them, and this is what is massively baffling, a great many of those people know that it's the Conservatives' fault. They know it's not Labour's fault that the situation the country's in now is. They don't think it's Labour's fault. It was 10 years ago since they were in power. Even if they thought certain things were their fault 10 years ago. They certainly don't now. But they still voted Conservatives. Boris Johnson managed... This man can sell sand to Arabs. He managed to say to them that 10 years of Conservative government have brought the country to its knees. Vote Conservative and I'll make it all go away. What's the betting he's not going to do it again? You know, he's going to crash us out and then get this trade deal and manage to sell this trade deal, which are absolutely god-awful, as being brilliant. I can absolutely see that. I really can. Right, next one. On to a bit of more Labour here. My party in ruins. Labour needs to ditch the policies of Corbyn like nationalisation and a Green New Deal as they cost too much money and were made by McCluskey. Momentum needs to be kicked out along with the soft left for enabling Corbyn. We only adopt policies and ideas that are popular with the electorate because getting elected is the most important thing. Labour is a party of change, not a glorified protest group. This is my fear, that this belief starts to hold sway. Say Labour needs to ditch the policies of Corbyn. If you mean the policies, the Labour policies in the manifesto, one, they're not Corbyn's policies. He didn't come up with a single one of them. We don't need to ditch them. We need to retain them. Now, here's where I am in the scenario. I liked the policies in the Labour manifesto. It was too cluttered. It wasn't focused enough. They should have just focused on what they could do in one parliament, and instead of cluttering it full of stuff that's like for the next 20 years. But the policies in it were sound. And this thing about Green New Deal costing too much money, no, it saves money. Economists have said this is good for the economy. We know it's good for the economy because, and these economists aren't talking hypothetically. These policies have taken effect in other major economies in Europe and are doing well. We are not doing anything new. These policies don't represent, well, we're certainly not doing anything new, but the policies don't represent anything new. They represent catching up to economies that are doing better than us. And you say were made by McCluskey? No, they weren't. They weren't made by McCluskey. They weren't made by Corbyn. They were championed by those two. They believe in them, which is one of the only good things I can say about them. But they didn't come up with them. They're not clever enough to come up with them. These are, policies that have been developed by other countries and have been proven to work well and grow your economy. However, this was always my fear, and I did a video on this before the general election even. If people associate these policies with Corbyn, then this belief could take hold. Because Corbyn bad, anything attached to Corbyn bad. If Labour try and pin these policies on Corbyn, anchor them to him, they are going to drag those policies down with him because he is sinking and he's going to carry on sinking, and anything attached to him is going to sink with him. Over time, it may not be quick, but over time. And that is my big fear. But we need to actually retain those policies. And it's not just me being on the left wing wanting those policies. I just didn't like the individuals that were in charge of Labour, because that was ultimately it. I had no issues with, apart from Brexit attitude, the policies that Corbyn was championing, no issues at all. My issue with him is him. The fact that he is not controlling the party. He is not challenging the Conservatives. That he managed to lose a general election that was there on a silver platter. That's the issue I had. I had the issue with the individuals being utterly incompetent rather than, and fairly dishonest in many cases, rather than the policies. Then the next bit says that momentum needs to be kicked out along with the soft left for enabling Corbyn. No, right. No. You do. This is what they did, and that's why we lost. You don't win an election by narrowing your appeal. You kick individuals that are very bad out of the party. You kick racists out of the party, for example. But a whole section of the party, no, you don't do that. Tony Blair, for example, you take Tony Blair, for example. Jeremy Corbyn was constantly voting with the Conservatives against Blair's Labour government. And this isn't about the Iraq War thing, by the way. We're not talking about he voted against Blair on certain policies that people will say shouldn't have been Labour policies in the first place. No, he voted with the Conservatives against Labour on many times. And people that fans of Corbyn have the nerve to call Blair Tory light, and who never voted with the Conservatives, except when it was cross-party interest. And he was, at one point people were saying to him, you need to kick him out of the party, you need to withdraw the whip, because he is constantly acting against the Labour government. And he always had. He acted against, Neil Kinnock when he didn't form a government, but when he was Labour leader, he has railed against every single Labour leader that wasn't Michael Foot. And he said, you need to kick him out of the party. And Tony Blair said, no. He said, Jeremy Corbyn represents a section of the left wing, and that is part of Labour. Complete contrast to what Jeremy Corbyn did. But that's because Tony Blair understands it. He may not have liked it, by the way. He may actually, on a personal level, have wanted to do that. But he understood the need to have mass appeal if you're going to win elections and if you're going to win big. Labour should have room, be a home for the full spectrum of the left wing. And it also wants to nick a few from the centre as well. Whereas, now what I do agree with is momentum. You cannot have people holding a party hostage. So momentum certainly need kicking in the nuts, so to speak. Or I would prefer it if they could be persuaded to act as an action group to champion socialist policies, not interfere in individuals being elected to certain positions. Forget about that. Champion the policies. Whoever becomes Labour leader, just pressure them to adopt these policies. Don't pressure anyone to vote for a particular leader. Just pressure that leader, and they'll have enough power to do that. Same with the NEC. Don't install your own stooges. Just pressure them to make sure that they are championing the socialist policies. Do that and we get the best of both worlds, don't we? And then it says here, we only adopt policies and ideas that are popular with the electorate. What makes you think the policies in the Labour manifesto weren't popular with the electorate? They were. Again, we know why people didn't vote Labour. We know that. We've got it from polling, and it is the polling that has been proven to be accurate, not just any random poll. And nowhere in it did people say that they didn't like any of the policies. What it did say about policies is they did not believe that Jeremy Corbyn could deliver on them. That was the thing. They didn't believe he could deliver them. That's a credibility issue on the leader, not the policies. There was no exit polling or polling before the general election that indicated that people did not approve of Labour's policies that would have otherwise voted Labour. Obviously, Conservative voters didn't approve of them, or the traditional Conservative voters. But traditional Labour voters and people who would vote Labour to get rid of the Conservatives under normal circumstances, they said Jeremy Corbyn was a problem. They said Labour's Brexit policy was a problem. They said that they didn't believe that Jeremy Corbyn could deliver on the policies. What they didn't say was that they had an issue with any of those policies. So, but yeah, this is, for me, a massive, massive fear that we end up with a scenario where people believe this. They believe that it's the policies that are the problem, and it's not. And the way to rescue these policies is to prevent anyone from attaching them, anchoring them to Jeremy Corbyn and Corbynism, if you want. Get rid of the term Corbynism. It's a horrible term. All it represents to me is enabling Tory governments. Next one. So this is in terms of what we do post-Brexit. We will use the old way of getting a deal, the we are British, don't you know, and expect to get everything we want. In a way, where we are now, I'm going to be honest now, where we are now, I'm actually hoping that is the plan. I really am. Because if that is Boris Johnson's plan, that he just goes, we're British, don't you know? And where's my deal? Here's my deal. Give me my deal. If that's actually his plan, then that'll be quite good, because it means he won't achieve what he's hoping to achieve, and he'll be wrong-footed, and the electorate are more likely to see through it. Whereas if he actually has a realistic plan, that realistic plan by definition has to incorporate a fooling of the electorate, which will be in place and all work seamlessly. That is my fear. So at the point we're at now, we're headed for dreadful times. I am now pinning my hopes on Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings and anyone else involved in the project being utterly incompetent, having no realistic expectations of what's going to happen. That is now my hope. And I know what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that the country ends up in a bigger mess than it might ordinarily, but and that's a terrible thing to hope for, because I also recognise what that actually means is suffering for many people. But I also recognise that even if they have a more realistic plan, those people are still going to suffer anyway. The plan will only be for fooling the majority of the electorate, which is not, unfortunately, the people who are most vulnerable. Bear in mind, the people who are poorest are going to struggle at the next election because they're going to need photo ID. So there's a lot of poor people not going to be able to vote, not going to be allowed to vote. Unless, of course, there is a massive fundraising, if maybe a charity needs to be set up to help people be able to get photo ID if they can't afford it. That is possibly something that's going to need to be done. But yeah, I am now hoping that they have no idea what they're doing. And because the bigger the fail, the more clear it'll be to everyone else, the more likely we are to be able to get rid of him in 5 years' time. Because at the moment, that prospect ain't looking good. Next one says, Phil, often you say things like, the people will see him for what he is and vote him out. Okay, before I go on to the next bit, have I often said that? I don't remember ever saying that. I hope I've never said that. If I ever had said that, the general election would have, well, not even the general election result itself, because it was predicted beforehand, but the run-up to the general election would have disavowed me of that notion. But I certainly don't think I've said that on a regular basis. In fact, my experience of British politics over the last 30 years has been one of, how on earth are people not seeing this? As soon as I became politically aware as a teenager, my overriding memory is of, what are people doing? Why are people not paying attention? What is going on? Now, fair enough, at the time I was a teenager, I wasn't exactly a font of wisdom myself then. I like to think I'm old enough now to, yes, be able to look around and go, what are you sheeple doing? What on earth are you thinking? Are you thinking at all, indeed? So yeah, I don't think I've been thinking of saying that, have I? I really don't think I've been saying it a lot. Anyway, so my question is, after this point is, how are you so sure? Well, we've already... If I ever have said it, I ain't saying it anymore. I'm hoping people will see him for what he is. I'm not thinking they will. They haven't. Anyway, it says, it seems like reality and sense no longer have a purchase on a lot of brains out there, and I'm concerned that the Tories, as well as the Republicans in the USA, may somehow find a way to brainwash just enough percentage of the populace to be extremely difficult to dislodge from power. Now, I'll do the last bit first, because I don't know enough about how the Republicans and Democrats operate on a micro level. But in the UK, with the Conservative Party, and it might be the same with the Republicans in the US, I don't know. But with the Conservatives in the UK, one thing that they definitely do, which I wish Labour would consistently do, there's a couple of things, in fact. The first of which is, when a general election has taken place and the results are in, the Conservative Party ask their leader a single question. Are you the Prime Minister? Because if the answer is no, they are no longer the leader. Gone. On your bike. They don't get another chance. If you lose, as a Conservative leader, if you are not the Prime Minister after a general election, you're gone. You've failed. Sayonara. The second thing they do is they spend money on getting effective. I was going to say good then, but then oh, it was good. But, in the moral sense. But effective political strategists who are extremely good at targeting the right seats so that with a small number of votes, it's much easier to persuade a small number of people than a large number of people. With a small number of votes, you can make those big gains because both America in terms of the presidential elections and the UK in terms of general elections has a effectively first past the post system. It's not proportional representation, far from it. Neither Donald Trump nor the Conservative Party won anything close to a majority of the popular vote. And yet they both have power, executive power. And if you look at the Conservatives, they had a massive swing of something like, I can't even remember how many seats, like 70 odd extra seats they won compared to 2017. And that was with a mere 300,000 extra actual votes. The number of votes they got in this election was only marginally greater than they got in 2017. And even as a share of the vote, because the turnout was slightly down, even as a share of the vote, it's not much higher. But what they did more effectively this time than last time was target seats effectively. And I'm smiling because of what I'm going to say next. Target seats effectively. And they were winning loads and loads of seats by a small margin. Remember what I was saying before the general election? That's what the polls were predicting. Yes, they were predicting a large majority for Boris Johnson, but based on a large number of seats with a small margin for victory. If just more people had turned up and voted against him, that majority would have been wiped out, utterly wiped out. The next thing I was going to say is, of course, this is where Labour got it badly wrong, because their political strategists, who've just been given a permanent contract for their failure, they targeted 70 seats, and they won one of them. Their success rate is 1 out of 70, approximately 1.5%. That is a success for them, and that is worth rewarding them with a large salary on a permanent contract. Absolute madness. And that is one of the reasons why they're difficult to dislodge from power, because the Conservatives, and I don't know whether it's the same in America, maybe the Democrats do sensible things as well, but certainly in this country, the Conservatives will get the people who are going to deliver them that electoral success. Labour sometimes do and sometimes don't. Quite often don't. But in terms of, coming back to the middle comment here, seems like Reality and Sense no longer have purchase on a lot of brains out there. And but I don't think they ever did. I mean, there's nothing particularly stupid about people of Britain. They've done stupid things. And they haven't always done stupid things. And what's the difference? The difference is the information they are getting. There used to be the media has always been biased. As long as people who want to push an agenda have owned sections of the media, which is in this country forever, there have always been bias in the media. The big one, of course, was the BBC, because that is massive. That absolutely outstrips the usual Tory-led newspapers. But it is the fact that the media used to be more objective than it is, and people used to get a more balanced view, and now they're not. And social media is not helping as well, because particularly Facebook is very, very echo chambery. And even though, where's he gone? God, I can't even point at the bloody thing. There it is. And I've created a Facebook page for the channel myself. If you can't beat them, join them. And but it is very echo chambery, isn't it? Twitter less so, but any form of social media is still going to try, and you're still naturally going to be bombarded with messages that inflate your bias and don't challenge your biases as well, in a way that general media doesn't. Like, if you're going to watch a news program that is actually objective, you're going to watch some articles, you go, I agree with that, and you like that article. Then it's going to report on something, and say something you don't like, and I don't like that. Doesn't happen so much on social media, because it knows what you like and it wants to give you what you like. That's its marketing model. And it's a bit worrying. It is a bit worrying. Anyway, last one says, don't worry, the Daily Mail will tell everyone that we have never had it so good, and people will believe and argue it on behalf of the Tories. Getting a bit like North Korea. Well, I'm not sure about the North Korea thing. Not yet. But yes, the Daily Mail will absolutely tell people, we've known it so good, they will emphasise that it's absolutely brilliant, because the problem is an individual only sees things immediately around them. Their view of the whole country, as it is for all of us, is based upon what we read. Because we can't know what it's like across the whole country. We need people to survey the country. And a lot of people, yes, will believe the wrong people on that. And they will plug it. And the thing is, the people who know it's absolutely crap won't be fooled by it. But that's fine. They don't need to fool everyone. They just need to fool enough people. And ultimately, that is what newspapers like the Daily Mail will be doing. They will be fooling enough people. And as you know, we're a weird species, aren't we? Because we're a pack animal. So therefore, there's a part of us that needs to conform. And then, you know, packs have leaders. So we also like to believe we're special sometimes as well, to rise above. But ultimately, we have that strong sense of conformity. And if we see, if the Daily Mail and papers like that are saying how pleased everyone is with what Boris Johnson is doing, then some people start to go, I'm not very pleased, or I wasn't before I read this, but actually everyone else is. Or maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe actually things are better. And actually, and that is going to be a real feature. It's going to be one of the defining features of the next election when it comes round, and who knows what state we'll be in then. The media will be backing Boris Johnson. I mean, there can be no doubt about that now. The BBC bent over backwards to back him in this general election, and now he has proper control of them. So if they were doing it before, they will certainly be doing it now. In fact, they have been doing. And that is a very worrying sign. And the only solution to that are ultimately grassroots movements. It would be nice to think that we'll have a Labour Party that will actually be able to appeal to voters again. But even for a good leader, they've got a hell of a task ahead of them. And so I think, grassroots movements, people-powered movements, which we've been developing over the last year or so, are going to be crucial, and they have to keep going and enlarge and grow. And that's ultimately what's going to be needed, not relying upon the electorate to be listening to a message from the opposition, but for us to carry out that message, for us to talk to people individually. A people-powered movement is the only way, probably, to dislodge Boris Johnson next time. So anyway, those are the comments for this week. Hope you found them enjoyable. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and also subscribe to the channel if you wish to see more of my videos. But thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.